interdisciplinary program of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Skopje. The program initially is created to foster critical thinking and knowledge in culture and art. Due to the COVID crisis, this year the program is realizing through the series of online lectures. Tonight, to our really great pleasure, we have Šantal Muf as our guest speaker. Šantal Muf is one of the leading political theorists, and also she is a professor at Westminster University in London. Her work, in the very innovative way, relates to democracy, Marxism, and feminism. Also, her work derives, let's say, from that contemporary political events. So from that reason, she is very present in the ongoing intellectual debate today. Šantal Muf published a lot. Among her books is Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, published in 1985, co-written with Ernesto Laklau. This book is one of the most influential into the radical political theory, and also initiated, so-called post-Marxist approach. Just let me put it very illustratively, in spite of the Marxist category of class and economy, the focus in this book is put on the multiplicity of struggles and the multiplicity of identities. Among other books are On the Democratic Paradox, published in 2000, Agonistic, Thinking the World Politically, published in 2013, also for a left populism, published in 2018. There are plenty of reasons why the work of Šantal Muf is extremely important. Just in this brief introduction, I would like to highlight three reasons. The first one is that throughout her work, she produced really important concepts and ideas such as hegemony, such as agonistic politics, agonistic struggles, also making really important differences between antagonism and agonism, between the political and politics. And in a great extent, this theoretical work, let's say, is based on the brilliant reading of the authors such as Antonio Gramsci, Carl Schmitt, Ludwig Wittgenstein, or Hannah Arendt. As I mentioned before, her work derives from the contemporary political events. And actually, this is the second point, that what the political landscape we are witnessing, we can extrapolate this concept in the explanation of what is political situations today. And we can find really great discussions about European Union, about the crisis of the left, about the crisis of the social democracy also, about the rising of the right-wing populism, and even necessity the left to appropriate the populist strategy, let's say. And the third point, and why this is extremely important discussion initiated by the Museum of Contemporary Art, is that she includes both cultural and artistic practices as a very important in the hegemonic struggle or contra-hegemonic struggle. Tonight, her talk is titled The Role of the Affects in Agonistic Politics. Chantal, please welcome.
Okay, well, thank you, Tiomir, and well, good afternoon, everybody. I am pleased to take this participation in the series of talks at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Skopje. So, as announced, I'm going to speak to you about the role of affect, and as I'm going to explain more certain type of affects, which I call passion, in politics, in agonistic politics. So, in order to grasp what I understand by, passion and the role in agonistic politics, I think it's necessary to be acquainted with the theoretical framework that inform my approach. And this is why I will recall the main line of my conception of the political to start with. I have suggested in my work distinguishing between the political and politics. The political is linked to the dimension of antagonism, a dimension that is present in all societies, an antagonism that can emerge out of many different relations, and on the other side, politics, which aims at establishing order and organizing social coexistence, but under conditions which are always conflictual, at least potentially conflictual, because they are, so to speak, traversed by this dimension of the political and of antagonism. We find this distinction between politics and the political in other theories. I don't pretend to be the one who invented it. But of course, it can be a bit confusing because it is sometimes different understanding in different thinkers. So I think that in order to clarify a little bit that discussion, it is useful to distinguish between two basic different understanding of the political. We are finding people who on one side understand by the political the space of liberty, common action. This is called the associative view of the political. And there is another group of people for whom the political is a site of conflict, a site of antagonism. And of course, this is what is called the dissociative conception of the political. I situate myself in the dissociative conception. And I want to insist on the importance of that distinction because if, according to the conception of the political that you start with, you are going to pose questions in a different ways and have different answers. And I think that, it's very important to specify that I start from a dissociative conception of the political. The thesis that I defend is that it is only when the ineradicable character of division and antagonism, which is linked to the political, is recognized that it is possible to think in a properly political manner and to face the challenge confronting democratic politics. Taking account of the dimension of the political signifies acknowledging the existence of conflict that cannot have a rational solution. This is precisely what antagonism means. There are many different conflicts, and antagonism is a specific form of conflict. It's a conflict that does not have any rational solution, and this is what is specific to the political. To be sure, not all conflicts are of an antagonistic nature, but I insist that properly political conflicts are those who are antagonistic. So because they always involve decision in the field of politics, which require a choice between alternatives that are undecidable from a strictly rational point of view. Political life, in my understanding, will never be able to dispense with antagonism because it concerns public action and the formation of collective identities. It aims at constructing a we in a context of diversity of conflict. Yet, in order to constitute that we, one needs to distinguish it from a they. And this is for me, politics is always the construction of a we-they relation. That's specific of the dissociative conception. The associative conception does not accept that. They say, why do we need to distinguish between, we and they? We can always be part of the we. Well, this is precisely what I disagree with. And I think that politics is always we, they. And of course, that always imply the possibility that under certain conditions, this we, they will take an antagonistic form because not all we, they are antagonistic. They can be simply a difference, but properly antagonistic form are form of the we day on the mode of the friend and enemy confrontation. And this is why I have argued that the crucial question for democratic politics is not how we are going to really reach a consensus without exclusion, because in fact that will amount to constructing the we-they distinction in a way in which it does not exist anymore. It will mean to construct a we that does not have a corresponding they. And this is precisely what I put into question. So in fact, once we accept that there is no we without a they, we can understand that democratic politics is not the construction of a completely inclusive we, but the problem is how we are going to construct this we-they discrimination in a mode which is compatible with democratic pluralist institution. That's absolutely central. This is what I call and I'm going to develop that point, an agonistic relation. According to this agonistic model that I have developed in several of my writings that Timo make reference to conceive pluralist democracy in a way that does not deny the antagonistic dimension, supposes envisaging two possible forms of manifestation of this antagonistic dimension. I mean, antagonistic, remember, I say conflict that has no rational solution, but it can be put into scene, if you want, in different way, because it can be take the form of antagonistic form, that is a friend and enemy confrontation, but it also can take the form of a confrontation between what I call adversaries. And this is what I understand by agonistic. It's a confrontation which is not a mode of the antagonistic friend and enemy, but on the mode of a struggle between adversaries. This agonistic confrontation is different from the antagonistic one, not because it will allow for a possible consensus, because in fact between adversaries there is also impossibility of a rational consensus. But the main difference is that in the case of an agonistic confrontation, the opponent, the they, is not considered as an enemy to be destroyed, but as an opponent whose existence is considered as legitimate. That is, of course, doesn't mean that we are not going to fight against ideas, but we never put into question the right of the opponent to defend its ideas. So it's not, we don't want to eradicate it, which is the case of antagonism, friend and enemy, but simply to fight in order to, with an hegemonic fight, but we always accept the right of the opponent to defend a different position. This distinction between antagonism, I insist, friend and enemy relation, and agonism, relation between adversaries, permit to understand why, contrary to what many democratic theories believe, it is not necessary to negate the ineradicability of antagonism in order to visualize the development of a democratic order. Because many people, I'm thinking of Habermas, say, no, if we accept the ineradicability of antagonism, then we can't really imagine democracy. I say, no, we can imagine democracy on condition of realizing that this antagonism can take the form of an agonism. And in fact, I will even go to the point of asserting that the agonistic confrontation, far from representing a danger for democracy, it is reality the very condition of an existence of democracy. Of course, democracy cannot survive without a certain form of consensus, but this consensus must relate to the allegiance, what I call the ethico-political value, that value that constitutes this principle of legitimacy. And of course, to the institution in which those principles are inscribed. That's what I call a conflictual consensus, because, in fact, this consensus on the ethico-political values must be accompanied of the possibility of dissensus about the interpretation of those values. And I think that this is really the agonistic struggle is a struggle about different interpretation of shared values. And I think that's absolutely crucial for democracy, that citizens have got the possibility of having dissensus about the interpretation of the values. You know, it's without an agonistic struggle, I don't think we can really speak of democracy. Okay, so this is a first point, the importance of antagonism. But to adequately apprehend the nature of the political, it is also necessary to introduce another category, a category of hegemony. In fact, in the book that we wrote with Ernesto Laklau, Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, we argue that there are two main concepts necessary to understand the political, antagonism and hegemony. To understand the political as the ever-present possibility of antagonism supposes acknowledging the absence of a final ground and the undecidability that pervades every order. And it is precisely this dimension that the category of hegemony refers to, as it indicates that every society is the product of practices that seek to institute an order, but always in a context of contingency. There is never the possibility of establishing a final order. In fact, this perspective is also called post-foundationalist. There is no final, foundation, but always a struggle, a good, but precarious foundation. The social, in fact, is constituted by sedimented hegemonic practices. That is, practices whose political origin has been, let's say, obscure, and practices that appear as if they were proceeding from a natural order. And I think that's also very important, to understand politics. For instance, if we think of neoliberalism trying to make us believe that there is no alternative. This is what exists today as the necessary consequence of, for instance, development of productive forces or something. No, it is an hegemonic order, and it can always be disarticulated. There are always alternatives. This is what the hegemonic approach, brings to the fore. And of course, you can imagine how important it is for politics. Every order, every political order, is the expression of a particular structure of power relation. It is always established through the exclusion of other possibilities that can be reactivated. And of course, this is every order is political, the result of sedimented hegemonic practices. What is at stake in the agonistic struggle is the very configuration of power relation which structure a social order and the type of hegemony that they construct. It is a confrontation between conflicting hegemonic projects. This is what the agonistic struggle is about. Different hegemonic projects, different understanding of the commonly held values. This antagonistic dimension is always present. That's what I think is important here to understand, because one should not believe that in an agonistic struggle there is no more antagonism. The antagonism is there, but it is, so to speak, sublimated. And it means that it can always emerge. So democracy is a constant struggle to tame, so to speak, the emergence of antagonism. So the antagonistic dimension, as I want to insist, is always present, but it is enacted by means of a confrontation whose procedures are accepted by the adversary. So this is what I call, there is a conflictual consensus. Need a part of consensus, but it always needs the possibility of dissensus. And I think it's an important theoretically, because such agonistic perspective takes account of the fact that every social order is politically instituted, and that the ground on which the hegemonic intervention occurs is never neutral, because it's always acting on a terrain that has been constructed politically anteriorly. In anterior way, it's always the product of previous hegemonic practices. And this is it's also an important idea. For me, the public sphere, the public space, is the place where precisely this hegemonic struggle is taking place. In the and it's a battlefield, the social public sphere. This is where the agonistic struggle takes place. And we need to insist that there is not a place, and again here I distinguish my view from the Habermas, where we are going to try to reach consensus. But it's always a place where there's never possibility of final reconciliation. Okay, though I needed to have, remind you, for those who do not understand my work, those two main concepts, antagonism and hegemony, in order to understand my perspective. Now, after those considerations, I can examine what I call the role of affect, passion in the field of politics. Well, here I want to insist that I prefer to use the term passion because I'm interested in a specific type of affects. Affects can take many different forms. And usually, of course, people will say, well, they are in politics, what is important is emotion. In fact, there are a lot of people who are me, but why do you speak of passion and not of emotion? Well, for me, it's important to distinguish passion from emotion, because by passion, I designate a certain type of common affects that are mobilized in the political domain and in the formation of we-they form of identification. While, emotion is basically a question of individual nature. When you speak of emotion individual. I'm not interested in that. Of course, I'm not saying that is not important. There is also a possibility to examine that, but that is not, according to me, what is really important in politics. What's important in politics are common affects, the one who are at stake in the creation of common identities, political identities. So this is very central in my approach, because my aim by speaking of passion is to challenge the rationalist view, which is dominant in the democratic political theory. And I want to underline both the collective and the partisan character of political action, bringing to light the crucial role played by affects in the construction of political identities. And I think that here it's important that crucial to my framework is the assertion that what is at stake in politics is always the construction of political identities, and that this also always entail libidinal investment, to use a term that of Freud. So this is where the libidinal investment is the affective dimension. Is absolutely crucial in the creation of political identities. And this is why I think that the term common affects refer to. One of my key criticism of liberal democratic theories is their incapacity to acknowledge this affective dimension. Incapacity which I take to be the consequence of their picture of the individual presented as acting in the field of politics either moved by interest or by moral concern. This precludes them from recognizing the collective nature of political actors and of asking one of the key questions for politics. How are those collective forms of identification created? And what is the part played by affect in the creation of the collective form of identification? And in fact, this is what my reflection about passion I'm addressing. The construction of political identities and the role played by the affective dimension in the formation of those identities. Well, of course, I'm aware that passion is usually understood in a negative way, and many liberal individualists consider that is referred to irrational and desire something undesirable, and this is why they want to expel that from politics. But this is precisely the view what I want to challenge. To begin with, the study of passion was at the center of the reflection of 17th century philosophers like Hobbes, Descartes, Spinoza, and Pascal. And in fact, it is only after it was displayed by Enlightenment rationalism that all this, importance of passion began to acquire a negative connotation. I think that the negative connotation of passion is very much linked to Enlightenment rationalism. And in fact, we had to wait for Freud and the development of psychoanalysis to revive and reformulate the themes which had been explored by the early modern theorists of the passion. And among those theories, there is one which I think particularly important, and I'm going to use it in my posterior reflection. It is Spinoza. And in fact, it's interesting to see that the affinities between Spinoza's notion of the conatus and Freud's notion of the libido have often been, pointed out. So I think that this is why, as we are going to see, I use both Freud and Spinoza in order to make my argument. Well, emphasizing the role of passion is, of course, also open to objection that those passions can be mobilized, or common affects can be mobilized in ways which are going to undermine democratic institutions. Well, this is clearly the fear that leads many theorists to exclude them from democratic politics. But as I have argued, this is something which is very important in my reflection about populism. This attitude is a very dangerous one, because refusing to provide democratic, agonistic channel for the expression of collective affects lay the terrain for the emergence of antagonistic form of their mobilization. And this is why I think that this is vital for an agonistic politics, whose objective is the construction of we-they, in terms of adversaries, not enemies, to envisage the condition under which adversarial common affect can be brought about. Once affect are recognized as playing a crucial role in the construction of collective identities, the following question arises. How can affect be mobilized in a counter-hegemonic direction? Try to transform or to disarticulate, as term that I use, the dominant hegemonic model. Well, of course, this is a question which is not easy to answer. It can only be, posed in certain contexts. But I think that psychoanalysis provides us important insight to formulate that question. Insight that can be made very fruitful politically through the articulation with the discursive hegemonic approach, which I've just, very broadly referred to, and which is the approach that we developed, Ernesto Laclau and I, in Hegemony and Socialist Strategy. Freud brought to the fore the crucial role played by the affective libidinal bonds in processes of collective identification. As he stated in group psychology and the analysis of the ego, and here I quote Freud, a group is clearly held together by a power of some kind. And to what power could this feed be better ascribed than to Eros, which holds together everything into the world? So, end of quote. Since affects are conceived as being malleable, according to Freud, and susceptible of being orientated and to different directions, the task for a radical democratic politics is to foster affective libidinal attachment that will contribute to the formation of a counter-hegemonic movement. Again, it's a big question, and we cannot give one single answer to how can that be done. Again, I'm saying that it's always in specific context, specific conjuncture that you are going to pose that question. But again, I think that here, even if we can't give a definitive answer, we can find ways to formulate that question that will help us. And I think here is where I want to make reference to Spinoza, and particularly Spinoza's conception of the affects. And Spinoza makes a very important distinction between affection, and he used the term, in Latin affectio, and affectus. It might be a bit difficult to understand, but I'm going to try to make that clear. Like Freud, Spinoza believed that it is desire that moves human beings to act. And he notes that what makes them act in one direction or the other are in all ways, can I say that? Well, it's always the affects. It's the affects, mobilize the affect that makes, move, that is going to make people move in one direction or the other. And here it's insists that what is at stake in those inscriptions or segments are what he called the affection. Affection means situation in which you are affected by something. The affect is the effect, if you want to see, the effect of an affection, of a form situation that in which you are going to be affected. So for Spinoza, what is crucial is those affection. I mean, is that there are always practices which have impact on some people. And he said when an affection is a state of a body insofar as it is subjected to the action of another body. When affected by something exterior, says the conatus, and here of course I remind you what Spinoza understands by the conatus is the general striving to persevere in our being. So when the conatus is affected by something, it will experience affects. And those affects are going to move it to desire something and to act accordingly. So you see, this process is an affection. You are really affected, an experience, an inscription, affected by something. And the effect is an affect. Affect is something that makes you desire something, and the desire is going to make you act in order to realize that desire. Well, I find that dynamic of affection, affectio, affectus, very useful in order to understand the process of creation of common affects. And in fact, I propose to employ this dynamic of affectio affectus to examine the mode of transformation of political identities. You know, remember my question is that how are we going to act to transform political identities? And of course, the result is to create the affection, the practice that are going to move people to act and desire something different. Because I propose to see affection as the space where the discursive and the affective are articulated in specific practices. So affection, as I understand it, is in fact a space where you've got an articulation between ideas, the discursive, and affects. You know, this is also very important, and I'm going to explain in a moment why, you know, again, the reference of Spinoza is central. But before that, I want to stress something, because there's been many confusion about what we understand by the discursive. By the discursive, I'm not referring to a practice concerned exclusively with speech or writing, but to signifying practices, practices in which signification and action cannot be separated. It's something, for instance, similar to what Wittgenstein called language game. But again, understanding that by language game, Wittgenstein does not refer to games of language strictly. For him, language game have got a real material dimension. You know, and I think our conception of the discursive is very similar to what Wittgenstein speaks by language game. So it is, in fact, not something which is only, you know, speech or writing, but it is something that articulates, you know, a discursive and a practical dimension. But also here I want to then say that there is another aspect, which is the affective one, which is articulated in the creation of common identities. And the idea that is through insertion in discursive signifying affective practices that the social agents acquire form of subjectivity. Form of subjectivity, and of course that's central to our anti-essentialist approach. They are not, you know, just the expression of position in class or position in gender. No, they're always discursively constructed. But in discursive construction, there is always an affective dimension, and this expresses itself in a practice of affection, you know, with the individual einschrijf, and this is going to create their political, but not exclusively political, but of course I'm interested here in the political identities. So I think that it's very important to see those discursive inscription, discursive affective, as providing the affection, in the term of Spinoza, which are going to bring about affects, which will spur desire and move people to specific action. So I think in this way, and I think for me it's rather important, we manage to combine the recognition that affect and desire play a crucial role in the constitution of subjectivity, with the assertion that they are also the moving force of political action. Well, now I want to, because I realize that this might seem to be very abstract, but I want to show you the importance of this, particularly when we want to tackle the role of artistic practices in the creation of political subjectivities. So this is the point that I'm now going to develop. But before going into that, I want to remind you something that I have repeatedly insisted, and that there is no art which is not political, which is not a political dimension. And I don't think that one should distinguish between art that is not political and political art. And I have suggested in many of my interventions and writing to speak better of critical art, to refer to what usually people call political art. Because if you speak only of political art, it would imply that the other form of art are not political. And this is what I put into question. There is a political dimension in all forms of art. But some of them, of course, tend to reproduce the existing situation. Others, in fact, try to transform it. And this is what I say, let's call that critical art, not simply political art. And for the perspective that I've developed here, the hegemonic perspective, artistic practices play a very important role in the constitution, in the reproduction, or in the challenging of a symbolic order. And this is why they always have a political dimension. You know, what is called political art normally is art that challenges the existing order. But art, we do not challenge the existing order, in fact contribute to its reproduction. And so it is also a form of political art, you see. So this is why I insist that it's better to distinguish between, or speak of critical art when we are referring to art which challenge the reproduction of society, of the specific hegemonic order, but understanding that art which is not critical also even a political dimension. In several of my works, for instance, I have examined the relevance of the hegemonic approach for the sphere of artistic practices. And I think that that hegemonic approach is very useful to understanding the role of artistic practices, because that approach, hegemonic approach, reveals that artistic practices constitute an important terrain for the construction of political identities, and that they contribute to the emergence of new forms of subjectivity by bringing to the fore the discursive nature of the social. The fact that the social is not given, it's always constructed by different types of practices. And of course, artistic practices are one of the forms of construction. It's not the only one, but it is one which is crucial importance. So in fact, the discursive approach reveals that what we take to be our world, if it was something natural, is always the result of a given hegemony. That means that what we see as natural is always constructed to a variety of hegemonic practices. And of course, those practices are not only located in the traditional political institution, but also in the multiplicity of places of what Gramsci calls civil society. And the reflection of Gramsci is particularly important for the role of artistic practices. Gramsci has insisted that this civil society is where a specific conception of the world is established. And he called that the common sense, the way what we think is normal, what is natural, what is just, what is unjust. And of course, is always the result of political construction. And Gramsci insisted on the centrality played by artistic and cultural practices in the formation and the diffusion of the common sense. So, and of course, you can see here the political importance of artistic practices in simply in creating the view that we consider the normality and what we can expect in society. And I think that the hegemonic approach allows us to grasp really the decisive role of cultural and artistic practices in the hegemonic struggle. So if you want to develop some kind of counter-hegemonic movement, the very important place to act is the place of artistic and cultural practices. What is at stake in the hegemonic struggle is indeed the transformation of the common sense, understood as the space where specific forms of subjectivity are constructed. And here again, I want to insist on the point I'm making here. Artistic and cultural practices play a very important role in that respect. That's something that I've developed, in many of my work. But what I want to do here in this presentation is to develop those reflections about the role of artistic practices in the construction of the common sense by articulating them with the question of affects, which I have just discussed. As we have seen for Spinoza, it is through the mediation of the affection that human beings can experience affect that are going to make them desire and act accordingly. And I insisted again, affection, create affects, desire, and move people to act. And of course, I have also proposed to see those affection, to use the term of Spinoza, as the space where the discursive and the affective are articulated into specific practices. Well, those specific practices can be of many different nature, but I think that artistic and cultural practices are crucial in that field. By envisaging artistic practices as providing those affection to which Spinoza refers, we can understand how they produce affects that bring about desire to act. After having acknowledged in the first moment the role that artistic practices play in the construction of the common sense. So this is the aspect of my work that I've developed in many books. But I think that what we need to also show in this second moment is the role that they play in different forms of subjectivity because of their affective power. And I think here the question that I want to insist on is to reveal that it is thanks to the affective force of artistic practices that this subjective dimension can be activated. I contend that for all those who want to intervene in the cultural and artistic domain in a critical way, it is crucial to visualize artistic practices as the articulation of discursive and affective elements. Contrary to the rationalist approach, such a perspective indicates, and here I know that what I'm going to say might seem controversial to some people, but I think that it's for me a point which is crucial. Contrary and to this rationalist approach, the hegemonic perspective indicates that it is not by reaching the understanding through concept that artistic practices are able to bring about a transformation of subjectivity. It is by their articulation with affects, that ideas can gain real force and crystallize in desire. And I think that really the force of artistic practices is precisely because they are not mainly, acting on, like philosophy, on concept, but they are really acting on sensation. Here, for instance, is a point, I'm not at all a Deleuzian, but I do agree with the point that Deleuze and Guattari make in their book, What is Philosophy? When they say that the contrary to many people who insist, on that, the aim of artistic practices is not, to create concept, is to act on the sensation. And I think that's what I call the affective, is their affective power, which is important. So the impact of artistic practices should not be envisaged primarily. I'm going to explain why I speak primarily. At the cognitive level, because the objective of artistic practices is not the production of concept, as I was saying, but the production of sensation. And this is why the cognitive conceptual dimension should not be privileged. Of course, and this is why I'm explaining why I say not primarily, it does not mean that there is no cognitive dimension in artistic practices, but that it is via the affective that this cognitive level should be reached. So it's not the aim is not to reach the understanding, but to act indirectly, to act on by sensation to reach the affective, and through the affective then to have some impact on the cognitive. I think that's basically the difference between, the specificity of artistic practices and their strength, because the artistic practices are really a space very important for, the mobilization of the affective dimension. And this is why I think we should visualize, this is how we should visualize how artistic practices can contribute to the subversion of the dominant hegemony. It is by acknowledging the discursive affective conception, character, that we can really envisage how they are able to modify subjective structure. And here again, I think that it's very important to refer to Spinoza, because Spinoza insisted that an affect can only be displaced by an other affect, an affect that is going to be stronger than the affect that exists. Again, you can see the potentiality of this for politics, because if you, and again, is something that I for me play an important role in my argument about left populism. The idea that if you want to fight right-wing populism and displace the type of affects which are mobilized by right-wing populism, it's not through argument, that you are going to do it. It's not through giving statistic or saying, no, what you do, this is wrong. It's not by trying to convince people. It's by mobilizing other type of affects which are going to, empower people towards, democratic objective, and affects which are going to be stronger, than the affect that at the moment are dominant. So it's the struggle against right-wing populism is something that really is a very important dimension of mobilization of affect. I think that there is a real important potential in political potential in this reflection. So in fact, I want to finish, insisting that for those who want to contribute to a radical politics of counter-hegemonic engagement with neoliberal institutions, one important task is to cultivate a multiplicity of practices that will erode the common affects, sustaining the current neoliberal hegemony. Because, of course, it has been pointed out by many people, the current neoliberal hegemony is sustained by affect, by, for instance, Foucault, if really insisted on the practice that is the mobilizer, speak to the soul. And Margaret Thatcher had got this, very clear, brilliant thing. She said, the aim of our politics, we are using the economic measure, but, our aim is to reach the soul. And I think that that's very important to realize that neoliberalism really does try to find strategies to, affect the subjectivity of people, to reach their soul. And if we want to, have an anti-neoliberal struggle, to have a counter-hegemony, it is important to work at that level. And this is, again, why I think that, it's a very important role for artistic and cultural practices. So what I'm saying, we need a multiplicity of practices. Of course, there are others. It's not only artistic and cultural one, but as I say, and I want to insist again, they've got a privileged role in that struggle to erode the common affect that sustain the current neoliberal hegemony and foster affect of a different nature. A counter-hegemonic politics necessitate the creation of a different regime of desire and affects, so as to bring about a collective will sustained by common collective will, a form of creating a we, sustained by common affects which are on a different order than the one who are really, maintaining neoliberal hegemony. And this is what I understand by the mobilization of passion. I think this is an aspect that is, have been very much criticized for insisting on the importance of mobilization of passion. But I think that, and this is precisely the great problem with the left in general and the rationalist approach. They do not accept that, one need to fight at the level of affect, to mobilize affect into a different direction. I think that I don't think that we can imagine the success of a progressive politics when it is not, envisaged in terms of creating a different regime of affects. Of course, it's not enough, obviously, but it is a necessary element. Unfortunately, as I was saying, usually left parties do not understand the importance of mobilizing passion in the democratic direction. They believe that there is something that only the right does that. The fascists do that, to work on emotion and affects. We, the left, we only use arguments. We should limit ourselves to deliberative procedure and rational argument. And I think that this is why they are not able to answer the challenge which is posed by the rise of right-wing populist movement. Because I am absolutely convinced that the success of those movements is linked to the fact that they understand much better than the left that politics is always partisan, that it requires the creation of a we-they relation, and that, it's absolutely vital to construct collective political identities and foster the construction of we, and that, imply absolutely the mobilization of common affect that are going to crystallize in we is always for me the crystallization of common affect, and we are not going to construct it only through rational argument. So I think that it's absolutely necessary to explain, to understand the success of right-wing populism in many, many countries on the basis that they have managed to foster new form of collective identification around the notion of a people which is constructed in a way that curtains democracy, people that, of course, is understood in a nationalistic term, people that restrict democracy. But that, and of course, we could discuss, if you want, the success of Trump is very much, of course, linked to the possibility of course, he lost the election, but as we well know, he has been increasing the number of voters. So Trump, is Trumpism, if we can call it like that, is certainly not that, even if Trump has lost the election. So I think that the way to fight against that, and if we take again the case of the United States, is to really manage to create a new form of we. And unfortunately, I think that so far the we which has been created is only on the basis of no anti-Trump. We need to much more. There's really not enough of common affect in towards a positive projects. So because I think that, and it's important point, and I want to finish on this. For me, the best way to fight against right-wing populist parties is not by accusing them of being populist, condemning their appeal to affects, and claiming that democratic politics must be based exclusively on rational arguments, and that it is necessary to expel passion from politics. I'm convinced that such a stand represents the main obstacle in the elaboration of a strategy that will be able to challenge our post-democratic condition. What is at stake is the creation of a progressive collective us able to crystallize affect in the direction that looks for a deepening of democracy. Because, again, Spinoza was saying it is only by displacing an affect through an other stronger affect that we can really create a new form of politics. And another point I think that Spinoza insists, so I would insist on those two ideas, because I think you something that you can keep in mind and try to develop. First, the idea that ideas only have power when they meet affects. And when Spinoza spoke of idées affectantes, ideas on themselves, if they don't meet affect, they are not going to have any real impact. And the second idea is that in order to displace some form of affect, that are the affects that, for instance, consolidate, reproduce neoliberal hegemony, you need to construct stronger affects. So, and as I was saying, I think that cultural and artistic practices have got a really privileged role in this struggle to construct different form of identities and mobilize different kind of affects. Thank you very much.
Right. I have a problem with maybe let me try again. Okay, there is a problem with my video, but I will ask several questions that I note. So first, I would like to ask about that you recognize a crisis, let's say, of the neoliberal hegemonic formation, and that this crisis opens the possibility for the reconstruction of the more democratic space. And you talked about that the conception of the politics implies these affective connections that tie the group together and make the distinctions between we and them. So in the construction of the we requires mobilization of the common effects. Later on, you're talking about about transformation of the enemies that will become adversaries, and antagonism will turn into agonism. So how do you think that these transformations can happen, or what does it take the enemies to become adversaries?
No, well, look, I can I answer? But I don't see myself anymore. I don't know what happened. Well, the most important is that.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's see. It's important. I hear, but I don't see. But that's not too important. Important that I can hear and well, what my point is that is not that want to transform enemies into adversaries. Of course, it can be. Ideally, I mean, what's important is that to create the institution. Let's put it. There is always in society conflict which are antagonistic. You know, it doesn't mean that potentially antagonistic. It doesn't mean that there is always, but there is always the possibility of this us, them, we, they, to appear as on the form of the antagonism. Well, I mean, by the way, for you, a good example that I usually give is the dissolution of Yugoslavia, because in Yugoslavia during the Tito's year and there were of course many different nationalities, communities, but there and obviously they were not seeing each other as friends, as enemies, so there was, and there were conflict, obviously, of different things, but it was not that conflict. You did not see, for instance, the Croat did not see the Serb or the enemy that wanted to destroy them. So, but under specific condition, and of course, here we know the Milosevic and wanted to establish supremacy of Serb. This relation became antagonistic. Then the people began to see their neighbors as a danger, a threat for their identities. But so what is important is that the institution exists that are going to, impede is too strong a word, because of course you can never impede completely, but make it less likely that this will appear. For instance, I think that in during the period of Tito, for instance, the fact of the rotating presidency and things, they were institutions that make it possible for the possible conflict, to not be of an antagonistic nature. And it is only when Milosevic got rid of their institution and wanting to establish, a Serbian supremacy, that they became antagonistic. So I think my point is that what's important is to have the institution in society which allow for conflict when it emerges, not to take an antagonistic form, but to take an agonistic one. So this is what democracy is about, a series of institutions that help to sublimate conflict. Okay, obviously, you can also ask, what can we do when there is already an antagonistic conflict? Is it possible? And of course, it's very difficult to transform an antagonistic conflict into an agonistic one. But it's not impossible. For instance, well, a good example, I think, is the situation in Northern Ireland. Because in Northern Ireland, we had really an antagonistic conflict between the Protestant and the Catholic. And it's not that they suddenly accepted some kind of total consensus, but they don't see each other, the Protestant and Catholic, as enemies. They do see themselves through adversaries. And of course, that is it's difficult to explain the process, but they were, group of civil society. We've tried to establish contact. I mean, the women, for instance, play a very important role and also, I mean, let's face it, some people after some time get tired of conflict, and then the conflict disappears. But there are, of course, another very important example, but of course, unfortunately, is not a place where you've already, see a solution, is the conflict between, the Israeli and the Palestinian. Because there it's definitely the relation between them is an antagonistic relation. But I think, and there are many people who, for instance, are using my work in order to envisage this conflict resolution. The aim there should not be to make those people suddenly, agree. You will never have them agreeing completely. But, if it had been possible and to transform them into adversaries, I think that the more that one can hope in the case of Palestine is that the conflict will become an agonistic one, but not, of course, a complete solution. So you see, the question, it's very, since one realized that to transform an antagonistic conflict into an adversarial one is possible, but very difficult. What need to be done is to work on amont before that, in order to make provide the institution that makes it, possible when this conflict, which is necessarily going to appear at some point, emerge. It does not take an antagonistic form. And for me, basically, democratic institution should be envisaged in that way. Should be envisaged of how are we going to allow for dissensus to be expressed in a way that it does not lead to civil war. In fact, Marcel Mauss, the important historian and anthropologist, French one, he had got a very nice formulation. I say it in French and try to say that the aim of in democracy is quand on peut s'opposer sans se massacrer, to oppose oneself without killing, to destroy. So you say this is what democracy should be about. Allow for this, opposition, but in a way that does not lead to the destruction of the other. But this is, you see, a very different conception of the one which is dominant in liberal democratic theory, in the type of politics which is not starting from dissociative view, but from the associative one. In their case, is how are we going to find the institution in order we can all agree, in order there is no anymore they establish a rational consensus. And I say this is not possible. So you should have to envisage the aim of democracy in a different way. What are the institutions that are going to allow people to disagree, but not in a way which is going to lead to civil war. I think that's what I will say. And can you remind me the first question, because I know I've
Yes, in addition of these questions, for example, about the public space, you advocated, let's say, what you call the agonistic public space, and this opposed the views of Jürgen Habermas, who, let's say, public spheres links to the rational consensus. So, according to this view, the public space, a term, of course, I'm trying to reinterpret it Habermas, where the aim is to create a consensus. But do you mean that this disagreement into the public space needs to be permanent, or through some dialectical process will lead to some kind of the reconciliation?
Well, I mean, let's say, the disagreement, will always be disagreement, but it doesn't mean that, can I explain that? The causes of disagreement can be different, because you can at some point, this a disagreement that can be disappear or be resolved, but what you will never have is a complete harmony. There will always be form of disagreement. It's not always the same disagreement, but there will always be different form of disagreement. When the public sphere, let's say public sphere or public space, because this is the term that I use, should not be seen as the sphere where ideally one should have harmony. I think that's what I'm putting into question, because there will always be a form of conflict. And this is, by the way, also something, and that's important to indicate here, while I defend the idea of democracy should always be envisaged, here I'm using an expression of Habermas, they say democracy à venir, democracy to come. It's a process that can never have a final resolution, because pluralist democracy, in fact, imply that there will always be the possibility of putting into question the existing institution. The idea that the aim of democracy is to arrive to a situation in which here that's it. We have absolutely found all the best institution, the solution to all the problems. There's no more dissensus. Well, for me, that's in fact very much like a totalitarian nightmare, because it means that if we will declare that at some point a society arrived, okay, that democracy has been realized. And so if there are people who disagree with some institution, they must be irrational. And in that case, let's send them to the psychiatric asylum or to the prison. I think that this idea of a perfectly realized consensus of democracy that is really realized is extremely dangerous. I think pluralist democracy needs always to have the possibility of challenging some existing form of. There's always, possibility of advances, a new rise which emerge. So this is for me also something which is absolutely crucial, but it needs to be, you understand why I was saying at the beginning, if you start, it's very important to see that there are those two different ways to understand the political. Because if you start from the idea of the political, the associative view, there is finally, harmony is possible, you are going to envisage the aim of democratic institution in a very different way than if you start from the realist view, which I think, I defend. No, there is always possibility of conflict there, but this conflict can take form of antagonistic one, and that's what we need to avoid. And another point I want to say, because I've been also working on that, the idea that there is no more antagonism, and here it is linked to my critique, for instance, of the third way of Tony Blair and Anthony Giddens, that the left-right distinction have disappeared. They declare, for instance, that adversarial form of politics has disappeared. And in fact, in the book that I published in 2005, was it? Yes, on the political, I was criticizing that view, and I was saying this is very dangerous view because it creates the terrain for the development of right-wing populism. And at that moment, in fact, right-wing populism was not very much, present in Europe. It was, you had Gorkaider and FPÖ in Austria, you had Le Pen, but the father of that. But I was seeing that, and in fact, I was seeing that because I've been following closely the political situation in Austria. And I was seeing that the success of Haider was linked to the fact that he was criticizing the situation in Austria, which was always, of course, a grand coalition, social partnership between the right and the left. And there were a lot of people who felt that, they were not represented. And for instance, Haider said, well, I'm going to give you back the power to really, put into question this establishment with left and center left and center right. Well, we have practically in all European countries right-wing populists. In fact, the development of this third way kind of politics, is created the terrain. So I think that by pretending that you can establish a real consensus, inclusive consensus, always there's going to be people who are outside, and those people who are outside who do not feel that there is place for their concern within the traditional, political parties. Those are going to develop more antagonistic form of expression. So for me, the guarantee of the fact that there is a real agonistic discussion is something that is really very conducive to undermining the possibility of this kind of antagonistic politics. So let's say if you don't have agonism, then there is much more likely that when conflict emerges, it will take an antagonistic form.
Thank you. When we are talking about the populist strategy, do you think that aesthetics need to be part of this populist strategy? Because there is let's say, aesthetic dimension in the political.
Well, yeah, no, but this is exactly the argument that I've been making in this presentation. Of course, I did not speak too much about left populism because it was not the topic of the day. But let me try to see how I can, without entering into a completely new presentation, address this question. My argument about left populism is that the only way, well, I do acknowledge that there is a danger with the development of right-wing populism, because right-wing populism, in fact, is developed some kind of very authoritarian, form of politics. So it's not something that I'm going to, well, never mind. No, it is a danger for democracy, because it not that right-wing populism, and there I disagree with people say, this is fascism, I mean, it's they maintain themselves within and that's what the difference, let's say, between right-wing populism and fascism, or the extreme right in general, the traditional extreme right, that right-wing populists do not put into question the framework of liberal democracy. That's something very specific. We need to understand that this is not the same thing as fascism. But of course, it is an understanding of liberal democracy which is much more authoritarian. And much more, in fact, what they do is to restrict democracy to a certain kind of people who are the national, for instance, if you take Marine Le Pen in France, I mean, what she wants is to some kind of welfare state, but only for the French, of native. So it is a movement that tends to restrict democracy. Well, my argument is that in order to fight against that, we need to develop something before. And those movements have success because they speak they express some real concern of the people. They are reaction against what I call the post-democratic condition, which is the consequence of neoliberal hegemony. So there is, and I think definitely we can see that also in the people who vote for Trump. There's a call for, they want to be heard. They want their voice to be heard. You know, there is a democratic kernel at the core of those movements. But it is a democratic demand which is going to express in a way which is leading to restriction of democracy. And I think that we need to, and that again, here I criticize very much left parties who consider that, you know, it's again, think of what Hillary Clinton, the deplorables, you know. There is a tendency among the side of definitely the left, but also some form of center-right to consider that those people who vote for right-wing populist parties, they are necessarily, homophobe, racist, anti-feminist, and so we do not even should speak with the people. By the way, an anecdote, I remember when I was very shocked when that was in 2000 already. It was the moment when, the FPÖ in Austria was very important, and when there was in 2000 a coalition between Georg Haider and the conservative. And Elfriede Jelinek, intervene and say one should not even speak with the people who voted for Georg Haider. Well, 27% of the Austrian population had voted for Georg Haider. So it means that 27% of the population were, to be discarded. You should not even take their concern into question. And I think that it is very much, unfortunately, the position of many leftists today. I know, but we don't speak with people who vote for Trump. We don't speak for people. Those are really, no. I think that one needs to try to understand, what is that those people want, and to try to really articulate those demands in a different way. And this is what left populism is about, to recognize that it's important, to take account of those demands of those groups, but that those demands can be articulated in a progressive direction. So, in fact, left populism is basically a question of articulating, creating different type of effects, which are going to, in fact, make people look for the progressive solution to the problem. And this is why I insist that, in the mobilization of AFEC, and that was my argument in the second part of my presentation, the artistic practices have got a very important role to play in the mobilization of affects, in the creation of different forms of subjectivities. So I think that obviously they've got, for me, a left populist strategy necessarily needs to also, intervene through artistic practices in order to create this collective will, these people, which is going to be conceived into a progressive way instead of, restricted itself to some kind of nationalism.
Thank you. When you're talking about the cultural and artistic practices and the mobilization of effects through them, do you mean, do you make a difference between institutional and uninstitutional artistic practices? For example, like uninstitutional, like when was Occupy movement, many artists joined this Occupy movement and occupied the cultural institutions because they recognize that cultural institutions somehow instrumentalize artists. So is it a privileged role only on these uninstitutional artistic practices that play a critical role, or also institutional within the cultural institutions?
Well, here I think that certainly there is a position that I disagree completely. Is the position that everything which is institutional, should be out. We should not, and I know, in fact, I've got some friends of mine who are in that position. No, we should not. Never, for instance, collaborate with a museum. Never go to a biennale. Never do anything which have got to do with the states. We should not even receive money from the state. They are completely thinking that everything which is to collaboration. I disagree with that, because I think one need to have a critical view with respect to the institution, but critical view doesn't mean to that want to destroy them. I believe that there are many institutions that can play a very important role, and in fact, I've been working on that for many years and collaborating with different institutions. For instance, Moderna Museum in Slovenia, Zdenka Badovinac in Ljubljana, but also, for instance, the Magba in Barcelona, the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid, the Mukwa in Antwerp. They are, museums which envisage themselves as agonistic spaces, So I think that one need to be also working inside the museum. And for instance, I think that they are question of biennale. I think they are, and in fact, I must confess that I had some kind of very negative attitude with respect to biennale, because I was saying that that's necessarily a product of neoliberalism. But then, I've been discussing with people. I remember a very interesting discussion I had with people with what was in the after the Katrina in the US, there was a biennale that was, what was the name of the main city? Oh gosh, I forgot now, but New Orleans. There was a biennale in New Orleans organized by people, was very, very progressive. You see, and say no. Of course, progressive biennale are not in majority. They are definitively not many of them, but it shows that you should not just say, never biennale, because biennale can also be become a site for an agonistic confrontation. So I think that one should have an attitude which is not the rejection of the institution, but more what I call a strategy of engagement. And in the field of artistic practices, I particularly, for instance, I think that museum and artistic institution, can be a site for an agonistic intervention.
And my last question is about the hegemony, the concept of the hegemony that you established it in 1985 in the collaborative book with Ernesto Laclau. So the world has changed a lot. So actually, how do you think that the hegemony is also changed? Do you think is, for example, now the hegemony is reproduced through the social networks and new ways of communication, and also we have a possibility for this counter-hegemonic struggle through these new ways of communication?
It's a difficult question to answer, and I must say that I'm very much skeptical. Let's put it. I think that the social networks have played. I do acknowledge that there are some positive aspect, but I think that the negative one are much more stronger. So I think that Facebook and all and those things is really not something that I think the consequences of that have been really more negative than positive. Of course, people will say, look, but for instance, during the Arab Spring, and they play important, and I know, but on the other side, the negative, that's the question always. Technology in itself is not neither bad or good. It's the way it's used, and it seems to me that unfortunately, so far, it has been better used by the right. But one thing which I find interesting is that, for instance, and that's specific of left populist parties, and here I'm thinking of Podemos and all la France Insoumise in France, they realize the importance, of the digital intervention, and they've been using it in critical ways, because normally the tendency, the left in general is very conservative with respect to those things. They are always behind, and I think it's good to see that left populist parties they've begun to realize, but no, we cannot leave this terrain only to the people who are going to use it to diffuse right-wing ideas. We are also going to use that. And for instance, in Britain, momentum, and there is an understanding of the importance, potential importance of those means of communication. But so far, if we see, the actual situation today, the consequences are much more, they are first more used by the right, and their consequences are more negative. But and in terms of, well, yeah, I will say that they tend more to reinforce neoliberal hegemony, but they could also be used and they should be used in order to try to, in a counter-hegemonic way. Again, it's a relation of force. The exercise is I don't. Let me think about that. I don't think that they're if necessarily help to the development of neoliberal hegemony, because they are, of course, also used. What I will say is that they do not necessarily lead to progressive politics, because they are also used. There are many groups which are, very right-wing, which are using them. They are in some challenging neoliberal hegemony, but from the right. What I do feel, and I'm not sure if your question also related to that, but what I feel that, and by the way, I think it's a particular danger today, where I see a danger and something that could really be reinforcing, and to lead to a different form of neoliberal hegemony is the way in which the GAFA and all those are creating a much more important, playing a more important role, and in which they are the development of something that Evgeny Morozov called solutionism. Some kind of idea that technology could resolve all the problem, you know, and I think that that's something which is a danger for democracy and something that really reinforces neoliberal hegemony, and particularly in the current circumstances. I think that we are the pandemic and the need to try to, you know, establish to present technology as the way in which solution is going to be brought. For instance, I don't know the situation in Skopje, but the important development of those apps in order to control the situation, in principle, to control the COVID, but basically it's also a way to control the situation and to, and obviously we also know that if they are, you know, people and sector who have been really profiting of this crisis are the big technological, you know, GAFA. So, and they definitively go into some kind of reinforcement of neoliberalism. I think we are at a moment where neoliberalism is trying, by the way, I think that we are living a crisis of neoliberal hegemony. I insist hegemony because, you know, it's not, I don't think that we are in a crisis of capitalism, and I don't believe in the thing that Zizek say about, you know, no, it's a time for communism. I think that, you know, we are not, capitalism has still got, you know, many resources. But neoliberal hegemony, that's something different. And I think that the neoliberal hegemony has been very much put into question since the 2008 crisis. Because before that, people thought, well, that's what I think, remember Fukuyama, the end of history. So we found, no, this is, and there is no alternative. And we found this is the really, you know, we've reached the point where the ideal model has been established. It's not anymore the case. You know, the 2008 showed the limits of and the big problems with the model of neoliberal hegemony, and then of course the movement of the places. So I think neoliberal hegemony is in a crisis. But I think, and it's interesting to see how this social, ecological, and economic crisis that we are living today is they are trying to take advantage of that in order to develop some kind of digital capitalism, you know, a new form of a neoliberal digital form of hegemony, and that I think is dangerous. I think it's dangerous because, you know, people are told that this is what is going to bring protection to the people. And I in fact, with respect to that, there is something I want to say, because I think it's also important. I think that it's crucial to realize that there is a big demand for protection among the people as a consequence of, you know, this crisis that we are living. And here I would like to make reference to the work of Karl Polanyi, the Hungarian sociologist, economist, who in his book, The Great Transformation, is show how when society undergoes, you know, some kind of crisis, when there are a moment in which important transformation, important challenges taking place. And of course, he's referring to the 30s in his book, was published in 1945. He said then, he speaks of a counter movement. People want to defend themselves, and, you know, they demand protection. But this demand for protection can be satisfied in many different ways. positive, progressive, or regressive. And for instance, the example he gives is the crisis of the 30s. There was one progressive outcome, which was the New Deal with Franklin Roosevelt, but of course it's also left to the development of fascism, of Nazism, and later on of Stalinism. So you see that this demand for protection can be articulated in many different ways, and I think that we are in an analogous situation today. Because there are, demand for protection. And in fact, one way in which the demand for protection is articulated is through this solutionism. And say, well, don't worry, we are going to give the technological solution to all that. Of course, there is the solution which is offered by right-wing populism and say, no, let's close the frontier. The problem is with neoliberal globalization, we need to close the frontier. And I think that this is a big challenge for the left today, because the left might be tempted to not take that demand for protection seriously and say, oh, protection, that's something, conservative. We should not deal with that. By the way, I mean, there is an interesting reflection on that by Ernst Bloch in his book History of Our Times, in which he criticized the left in Germany during the 30s for being, in a sense, let's say, responsible for the development of Nazism, because they did not, and particularly it got very critical reflection on the German Communist Party, who really, did not acknowledge the series of demand coming from, the German people, and of course after the war, and he said that Hitler was much better in understanding that demand and in giving it, a form of solution, which of course was very authoritarian. But I think that we should be aware that this is a possibility always, and that it's very important for, today I think that we are in a situation again in which this kind of big transformation of society, which is we are undergoing, can lead to a progressive solution. It can lead to technological authoritarian solution, or it can lead to a right-wing authoritarian solution. And I think that for the left, it's very important to give an answer to that demand for protection, which is going to orient this demand into a progressive direction, which is going to lead to deepening and radicalization of democracy. And in fact, the proposal which have been made recently in an article for Open Democracy is that it's around the idea of what I call a green democratic transformation, that the left should present a project for people. It's a narrative that is needed for people to believe, no, there is the solution to our crisis. There is one, but it should be about real, serious ecological transition that will be moved by, democratic advances. So, I think that we should, again, this democratic green transformation might be obviously, and it should, it's not something that say with technology is negative, but it should use those in order to develop a deepening of democracy. And if those things are not used in that way, they are going to be used in ways which are going to lead to more authoritarian solutions.
Thank you so much, Chantal. Thank you. Really wonderful talk. Thank you so much. Thanks to all who follow us.
Okay, well, all right. Thank you very much to all of you. And are things in Skopje? Are you in lockdown too or not? Is the situation bad?
No, we have safety measures, but not total lockdown. Now, some kind of the safety measures and the state of emergency, but not lockdown.
Okay, well, but let's hope that things get better for all of us, no?
I really hope.
Okay. All right, Tiomir. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye. And thanks again, Chantal. Thanks again.